Hey guys, what's going on? Excoundrel here. Today we're going to be talking about Mech Sorcerer. Yes, Mech has become very, very popular again over the last update. And I'm going to talk to you about the reason why. I'm just going to quickly move this so it's a bit more central. So that's good. I watched the Giant Slayer series last night. I don't know if anybody else also watched the Giant Slayer series last night, but I watched the Giant Slayer series last night. And a guy called Curvor, who I think is French, he ended up playing Mech Sorcerer every game and won the 4 pro games. Not coming first every game, but had the most consistently high placements out of anybody in that lobby, playing Mech. So before we dive into it, G2A sponsors the channel. Thank you, G2A. There is a reference link in the description below. Let's talk about Mech Sorcerer. Now, I'm not an expert in Mech Sorcerer in the early game, okay? I want to make that clear. I find Mech Sorcerer quite difficult to navigate sometimes. But I'm going to talk to you about the ways that I have played Mech Sorcerer in kind of working with the early game. There is a couple of obvious examples for the early game that I think work well. One of which is Annie plus any sorcerer. I think people like TF or Ari work really well. Annie's a really strong unit. If you can 2-star her in the early game, she does a lot of damage, especially with Sorcerer. And you combine this with 2 Vanguards. Ideally Poppy, because she works really well. Plus you can, at level 5, bring on a Zoe or another Star Guardian, like a Nico, for instance. And then adding another Vanguard that works well with Sorcerers, which is something like Jace or Mordekaiser or essentially anybody but Leona. Anybody but Leona to pair with Poppy as well. And this is like a really good, powerful start for Mech Sorcerer. What I like to have in the early game is usually like a Bramble Vest on the Poppy. I also really like an Ionic Spark on the Jace of the Poppy as well. These are 2 items that I will kill for Mech. I think both of these items are really good and they transfer onto Mech really nicely. Okay? The other start that you could potentially think about is... if I can just find it, is some kind of rebel start, okay? So the other start that you can think about is some kind of rebel start with Rumble. So we're talking about Demolitionist. What you're going to want is probably something like Malphite, Ziggs, and then maybe Zed. I think Zed's quite a nice individual 2-cost, but any kind of rebel start like this. And then you're going to give those similar items over to Rumble. Curvor really likes GA on Mech. I think he's probably the guy to follow if you're looking for someone to kind of lead the charge with Mech. But this is another good start for Mech because Rumble's going to keep those items and then you're going to eventually transition into the Mech. Okay? Obviously, in the mid-game, what you're aiming for is Fizz as soon as possible, and therefore going to level 6 or 7 and finding Fizz is important. As soon as you find Fizz, you're going to transition into the Mech as soon as you can. Even a level 1 Mech is very good as a frontliner, especially with these items, even a level 1 Mech. A lot of people like to keep Ziggs around. These would eventually just get replaced with any 2 sorcerers, but I'm going to show you the sorcerers that ideally that you want. Sorry, the sorcerer that you want. Victor is the ideal sorcerer that you're after, and he can take things like, not Hextech Gunblade, Spear of Shojin. I do this every time. They look similar. These kind of items work really well on Victor, and he's like a really nice addition here as well. Another good addition at this point would be something like a Shaco, because then you're going to get the Infiltrator bonus, okay? So this is like a nice level 6 that I like for this particular build. The other third item that you're looking for your Mech is going to be Quicksilver, and this gives you like a really good tanky Mech start. I've seen people running Giant Slayer, Infinity Edge, that kind of stuff, but I just prefer to have the tank items on Mech. It's designed to be a front line. So this is what your build would look like towards the mid-game. Eventually, you have options. Now, the options that I quite like, I think Infiltrator is a little bit overrated, especially if you're not playing the Giant Slayer variant or like the damage variant of the Mech. What I like to aim for towards the end game is 4 Sorcerer plus a Gangplank. And if I can get a Infiltrator spat, that's better. So what we aim for is just good sorcerers in the late game, okay? So good sorcerers that work well are, if I'm just having a look around, Xerath is nice to have. Obviously, he's just an incredibly good sorcerer. We've already got the Victor. And then adding someone in extra like having a look around. Syndra is good, but she needs a bit of time to ramp up, and I don't think she's good outside of Star Guardians. People like Zoe. So I like Zoe because she provides a little bit of target CC. So I think Zoe's a little bit of an underrated sorcerer as the game progresses. But this is what your build would look like, and then you add the Gangplank in. Okay, so your build would look something like this with the Gangplank. If you get Infiltrator Spat, I actually really like, this is going to sound stupid, either Infiltrator Zerath or Infiltrator Gangplank, which would give you the Infiltrators overall, okay? This is what your build would look like at level 7 or level 8. Obviously, you're unlikely to find Gangplank at level 7, so going to level 8 is something that you should consider. And going at level 8, I like to add Janna with the Ionic Spark. The reason I like to add Janna with the Ionic Spark is that she is really, really, really solid against Vanguard Mystics, because it's going to convert your mech's basic attacks into magic damage. Your mech's going to reduce magic resist with the Ionic Spark, and it's going to deal more damage overall. Plus, the mech survives a long time and gets a lot of value out of Ionic Spark in general. If you don't want to run the 4 Sorcerer version, I would recommend dropping like the Zerath and the Zoe and going in a Mystics variation. So things like Soraka and Karma work really nicely in this particular scenario. Karma does well with the mech in general. So this is another version of the mech build that you could run. But this is in general, most people run the 4 Sorcerer mech Demolitionist version, and if you can find an Infiltrator Spat, that's brilliant. At level 9, you would just go ahead and add an Echo, just to get that Infiltrator on. So this is kind of another way of looking at the build. Very, very cool. I've been playing it quite a lot on ladder recently. Feel free to go and test it out. Oh, and we're going to go through a game. Always forget that. We're going through a game now. So this is the game, guys. Something that was recently brought up on the channel was kind of where I play my games for the videos and stuff like that. Every single game, and you can check my lol chess, I play in ranked, which is, I'm now sort of about 60 or 70 LPM Masters. So I've managed to make it to Master Tier, I'm 60, 70 LPM Masters. So every game that I play is ranked, and there is a reason for that. I could go into normals. My normal MMR is really low, so I could go into normals and just play whatever the hell I wanted and get a first place and make the build look insane. But I prefer to show you a real representation of what the build is capable of, played by a very mediocre player. But, you know, I'm not the most amazing player to have ever graced the TFT landscape, as you might be able to imagine. But I consider myself pretty decent. I think I'm a pretty decent player. I got to Grandmaster, and I would consider that pretty good. So let's dive into the game now. As you can see, I've opted to pick up as many pairs as possible, and that allowed me to get to the Leona. I sold the Karma, specifically sold the Karma for the extra units to get that Leona, which was important. And as you can see here, we are running with the Ari Annie early game that I talked about, and I'm going to commit the Bramble Vest already, mainly because I had to commit something. With a start like this, where you get 2 Chain Vests and a Negatron Cloak, you kind of have to commit something in that particular instance. So committing a Bramble Vest to a 2-star Vanguard is really nice, especially when you know that it's very likely you're going to be able to back that Vanguard up with another Vanguard very shortly. And you can see here that I find the Mordekaiser. So what I end up doing in this scenario is I say, actually, I actually think like I'm pretty strong at this point in time. So I actually think I'm in quite a strong position in this period of time. I was scouting around for Blitzcranks, by the way. I was just having a look if there were any Blitzcranks in the game, so if it like matters where I put my Ari. The more central that you put your Ari, the more likely that I think she's going to get a decent ultimate off. But yeah, I was just looking around for Blitzcranks at that point. So I decided to level up here because obviously adding another Vanguard really increases the strength of my composition overall. I'm holding on to the Annie, obviously, because with Bramble Vest, whenever you get a Bramble Vest, you have to be thinking about mech. So whenever you get a Bramble Vest, it's always really important that you think about mech as a potential option, which is why I'm keeping the Annies on board right here. So this guy's got double Sorcerer, which makes my Bramble Vest a little bit more precarious. It also makes my it also means that my Vanguards are going to not survive as long. But luckily, we're pretty strong right now, and I end up selling everything on my bench that isn't the Annie and the Mordekaiser. Obviously, the reason I'm keeping the Mordekaiser is a 2-star Mordekaiser would be really good. Now, this is not the most ideal shop for me in the world. There's a reason for that. Dragon's Claw is an okay item, but I don't value it over Ionic Spark on mech, and I would have loved to have had a needlessly large rod so I could get the Ionic Spark on the field as quickly as possible, but unfortunately that's not the case, so I take the belt. Why do I take the belt? Belt is good for a couple of things. It's really, really good for Morellonomicon. Plus, just adding it to one of my frontliners is always going to help increase the survivability of my frontline. Just having a look around at the different units, I actually leveled up here and added in a 2-star Graves. 2-star Graves is a great individual addition to any lineup. Realistically, he's gonna blind the back line for, I believe, 3 seconds. So I think just having Graves is really nice here, and you can see it powered up my composition quite a lot. I'm on a win streak now. Just need to win one more to go into the neutral round in a good position. My economy is the only thing that's hit a little bit from this scenario. My economy is not in the best of slots. So I am thinking, you can see me thinking here about getting rid of the Mordekaiser for the Nautilus. I actually rate Mordekaiser higher than I rate, I rate Nautilus higher than I rate Mordekaiser in general, but Mordekaiser is a bit more survivable, I would say. So unfortunately here, we are in a situation where a very strong player with a Gnar, he sort of found a Gnar very early on, ended up beating me up, and I just didn't have what it took to beat him out. He had 2 infiltrators, and he managed to pick off my backline sorcerers really well. And we actually get to a point where we draw, which screws both of our streaks up. Whatever streaks we had, both of our streaks get screwed in that particular scenario. So that was a little bit disheartening because we should have really gone into the neutral round with a full win streak, which would have been super nice. But it killed my win streak, and we actually ended up both suffering at the end of that. But irrespective, we're still in a good position. One can never complain about being. Or one should never complain about being in this situation. And actually, I have a really, really good end result here. There is a couple of things to look at. I have an Ionic Spark, which I think is one of the more important items to consider in this particular what was the word I'm looking for here, guys? With this particular build, I think the Ionic Spark is really, really important. Plus, it's a great mid-game item in general. Like, you really tear through people's front lines, especially Vanguards, by just having an Ionic Spark on your side. Plus, having Sorcerers too. Ionic Spark works so well with magic damage versus Vanguards in the mid-game, which is why I made the decision to do that. I'm keeping the Ziggs around, just in case, but there's a reason that I'm not leveling up on 3-2. Usually, I would always level up on 3-2. The reason I'm not leveling up is I don't actually have anything to add in this scenario. Plus, I am so close to kind of getting towards a 50 gold threshold, and I think even at level 5, I'm pretty strong. Like, even at level 5, I think I'm just in a pretty strong spot in general. This guy with the Morello's blue buff Cassiopeia, I think it's very unlikely that I would have beaten him by leveling up and adding anything that my composition had. So I decided just to chill at this point in time. We sell off everything here, and again, I don't want to sell off the rumbles because they're going to be pretty important to me down the line, and I'm just scouting around to see what people are building at this stage in the game. It is important that I check. This guy right here has got a Bramble Vest, and that obviously could very likely be used for a mech as well. He also had a Jinx, which meant that he was able to get through my front line quite nicely. And again, I'm not trying to sell off things to hit 50 gold here. I'm going to take an extra turn, but be okay with the fact that I'm holding units that are going to be useful to me. Items here that would be good. None of them are particularly fantastic for my composition, so I think the best case scenario is for me just getting a spatula. Now, I went for the Z. The reason I went for the Z is just to deny a Z with a spatula, because a Z with a spatula is instantly thought of potentially going down the 6 Blade Master route, which is obviously going to be very good. Now, I could have actually pivoted my entire composition into Z Blade Master at this point. I could have pivoted my entire composition into Z Blade Master. I didn't really have the units for it, but things like Titan's Resolve and Bramble Vest are okay on Yi. Ionic Spark is okay on Shen, for instance. Like, I could have made that transition, but I just didn't really have the items for it, which is one of the major problems that I think I was facing. And as you can see here, we've started to lose. Now, I'm okay with losing just because it doesn't matter to me too much at this stage in the game because I'm still at 102 HP. Now, I'm obviously losing a lot at this point in time. There's only so much that I can do. And I've just noticed that this guy down in second to last place has gone into mech. He's actually found double Nikos, and he's also got a Fizz, which you see I'm actually facing up against him now. Now, one of the mistakes that I think he's made here, and this is one of the things that I think mech players may contest me on, but he seems to have prioritized Victor items over mech items. Now, I actually think that that's not the I don't think that's the best play, personally. I think prioritizing Victor items over Mech items is going to give you a really strong mid-game, especially if you hit a Victor 2 really early on. But prioritizing Mech items is going to give you that longevity as the game progresses. This game was very messy. I'm going to tell you now that this game straight up was incredibly messy. Like, we just had a rough game in general. Now, what you can see here is I'm, like, desperately searching around for a Fizz. I find the Thresh, which is enough for me to say, cool, let's just roll down to 40 and see where we get from there. But realistically, like, I really just need the Fizz at this point. The sooner that I find the Fizz, the quicker I can stabilize my loss streak. Like, or rather just stabilize my game in general. The Fizz is going to be so important to my ability to play this game overall. Just because he's like the crucial mech component. Now, the guy that I'm facing up against who's also gone mech managed to find a Fizz too. I decide that I'm going to roll down at 7 and look for a Fizz, as well as pick up anything else that's going to be remotely relevant to my build overall. Unfortunately, I roll down to 20 and don't have a single sign of a Fizz. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep around the Shakos, I'm going to keep around the Rumbles, because one of my late game win conditions for this particular build is trying to find a Rumble 3. Rumble 3 is really, really good, especially if you find the Demolitionist bonus. And again, I'm constantly keeping eyes on what my mech counterpart is picking up. Again, rolling down, I find the Janna, and I actually really like the Janna as a pickup here. I don't go for the Shako just because I genuinely do think that the Infiltrator buff is overrated. But what I do find on my roll down is a lot of Rumbles. Now, this sucks because obviously I want a Fizz. I've just wasted my entire economy to look for a mech, and I just never find the mech, which is never very good. But we have found some extra components to the build that I think are actually pretty strong. Things like the Janna, which I talked about later on, is very good in the late games versus Vanguard Mystics. And also I've got the majority of components to make a really strong mech. QSS is important, but also you don't especially need it. Like, QSS is really strong, but you don't especially need it because there isn't a huge amount of CC. The only thing that you have to be wary of when positioning your mech if you don't have QSS is if someone tries to Zephyr your front line, because it takes your mech out of action for way too long, and that is definitely an issue. As you can see here, just rolling around, I'm really looking for Fizz. Like, my game is not going to stabilize if I don't find Fizz. That's basically the absolute core of it. If we don't find Fizz, my game isn't stabilizing, and that's it. I think it'd be good for me to take the Leona off. I think maybe I kept the Leona on for a little bit too long in this scenario. What I could have done is if I found a Ziggs, I could have basically looked to... if I found a Ziggs, I could have basically looked to take the Leona off and keep those items on the Rumble. But we didn't find the Leona, so... Also, we didn't find the Ziggs or the Fizz. Now, we find Fizz, really importantly, right at the most crucial moment of this composition, in the sense that, you know, we've got all of our items for our mech now. We have what, 7 Rumbles, so we're 2 Rumbles away. And actually, we're actually in a pretty strong position now. We have a Morello's on our Victor as well. And we have a Spat. The Spat is actually quite interesting because if we find a bow, we can make an Infiltrator Spat. And just look at how strong my composition has got, just purely from getting the mech online with these items. The mech is really strong. The mech is actually super good. And we find another Fizz, which is super nice as well. Like, just finding another Fizz at this moment in time is great. We're keeping the TF and the Thresh on just because the Chrono bonus is nice. We're obviously just keeping 4 Sorcerers on the board. If I find a Gangplank, the Thresh is going to go. The Thresh is nice, but I don't have many Urgots, and really the only thing that Thresh is good at is getting Thresh 2 and getting Urgot, which is obviously fantastic. So I get the Shojin, and I actually make Infiltrator Spat Victor, which is kind of interesting to think about. The reason I make Infiltrator Spat Victor is because he's going to get to the back line, and he is going to essentially be not targeted right at the start of the what's it called? The fight. This guy went for the Zoe, which actually I think won him the game because he basically targeted my Victor. I'm going for a potential Thresh 2 here as well, by the way. This is something that I think is a bit of a pipe dream for me, given that I'm probably never going to get level 9, so it's unlikely that I'm going to find a load of legendaries to pull in. But it's something just keeping in mind. I found a lot of legendaries at level 7 here. I've hit that 1% chance, and I've really been milking it, so I got a little bit lucky with the Gangplank as well. The game plan should have been go to 8 and then find my legendaries that way. At this point, there are two paths forward. I'm obviously losing a lot right now, but at this point there are 2 immediate paths forward. I think the best case for me right now is go 8 and put the Janna in. I think going 8 and putting the Janna in is going to be really important for me overall. The Gangplank will eventually become good, in my opinion. The Gangplank will eventually become an important addition. And this is the guy playing the 6 Blade Master, but we end up winning because honestly, Mech is actually really good versus this. If you don't stack the Yi, Mech is, especially with Bramble Vest, Mech is actually really good into these scenarios. Items. I think the best choice for me is going to be a Rabadon's Deathcap for my Gangplank. Rabadon's Deathcap for my Gangplank, especially if I can hit Gangplank 2, is going to be great. Plus, my Gangplank is going off at level 1 more often than not because he's coming out behind the Mech. So the Mech transforms, he goes in, and then he eventually gets a cast off, which is fantastic. So I was thinking just for a moment about keeping the Echo in that scenario because obviously Echo with Infiltrator and a Rabadon's Deathcap is nice, but again, primary goal for me right now, get to level 8, add in Janna, and we can start to get through these front lines. Now look at these front lines, they're not dying very quickly. It takes the Mech's ultimate to actually get through them, and you can see I'm actually losing pretty heavily to a lot of these Vanguard players. So for me, the ultimate goal is get to level 8. Now, I actually roll down and find Rumble here and Fizz. Now, I think that was an executive decision made by me to say, okay, there are some upgrades that I need. Otherwise, I'm just not going to do very well in this game. But it was lucky. I made a good choice in that scenario, but I still think going to 8 probably would have been the safer play. But irrespective of that, our mech has become significantly more powerful with the addition of the 3-star Rumble and the 2-star Fizz, because that's going to massively increase the damage and the HP that my Rumble has. 2 strikes is an interesting conundrum here. I take it because I think that if my GP does go off, it's going to be a huge impact into the fight, especially with Demolitionist with the Rumble. But quite clearly, it's something that you really need Gangplank 2 to guarantee, especially without GA, and I don't have the GA for my Gangplank. But I do have the Frozen Heart, which is actually a really nice little addition. And after the neutral round, I decide to use my gold to go to level 8 exactly, and I've now added in the Janna, which is going to start to change the damage output of my team with the Ionic Spark. And you're going to see a shift in the way that my mech really starts to deal with people. Now, watch this specifically. We're doing way more damage to this guy. He is physical damage based, I am now magic damage based, and we absolutely crush the opponent mech player, which is great because he was initially beating me up pretty significantly. So, you know, with my Bramble Vest, I'm really, and the Titan's Resolve, I'm really protected against physical damage. And now with Janna, I'm dealing magic damage, especially with the mech plus Ionic Spark. This is really good versus Vanguard lineups. And for the most part, most people don't have a huge amount of magic resist. I mean, watch this right here. This is with a 3-star Z, even with a 3-star Z, even with a Dragon's Claw. Like, we just absolutely mince through him and we knock out the guy. With a 3-star Z with BM Spat would usually always guarantee you a top 3 space. I mean, it's very unlikely that you would ever lose, or most people don't end up losing in that scenario. But you can just see the power of the mech at this point in time. In terms of positioning, what I'm trying to do is, you might wonder why my GP is there, for instance. My GP is in this position because I want him to just come out after the mech has already taken aggro, and it just means he's more likely to get a cast off. Now, we didn't in that particular scenario, obviously, and this guy is actually very, very strong, but you could see that we only lost by a little bit versus this chap. And I think positioning-wise, I wasn't really in the best position for it. I probably should have put my Gangplank on the other side, so his what's the word I'm looking for? So his Frozen Heart actually took an effect here. Now, I was looking to go for the GA in this scenario, but actually I thought, I've got an Ari and I've got a Janna. Let's go for the Star Guardian Gangplank. So not only when Gangplank casts, he's also going to deliver extra mana over to the rest of my team. He's also going to benefit from an Ari cast and benefit from a Janna cast, so much so that he might actually get his ultimate off as a level 1 a bit more quickly. And again, this is where you're going to see the true effect of the Ionic Spark. Really good at dealing with Mystic Vanguard. This is a full Mystic Vanguard lineup, and we are just so strong at dealing with them because we have the Ionic Spark plus the Janna. It's a really good way of getting through that front line, as you can see. So I'm going to lock the Gangplank here. Gangplank, like a potential pair of Gangplanks, is just really, really important for me. So that's why I've decided to lock here. Now, I think that I'm going up against the Cybernetic player, so I've positioned for the Cybernetic player specifically. I want my mech to be directly in front of the majority of his team, and I want my Victor to dive to the back line so that he's not going to be immediately targeted by the Irelia. One of the other things about Infiltrator Victor is that it actually protects me versus other Infiltrator players. Basically, it means that my Victor jumps out the way of the Echo and the Aurelia, so he's not immediately targeted by them, which is great. They get stuck on the Ari, the Janna, and the Zerath, who actually are, apart from they're basically fulfilling... they're basically there to fulfill synergy requirements. They're not really doing much extra for the team. Now, very luckily, I get a larger area upgrade and a 2-star Gangplank, which I think actually pretty much seals me a top 2 scenario in this spot. I don't think my comp is strong enough for a top 1. I think we're really strong, but I don't think my comp is strong enough for a top 1 in general. And you can see here, this is the Rebel player who's got Rebel GP. He also has a 2-star Aurelian Soul with a Ludens. He's pretty strong. Now, we're beating him, and our mech isn't dying. That's another really important thing. Our mech's not actually dying in this scenario, so we're still in a really good spot. And now we're going up against... I need to have a look. This is the mech... So we're going up against the Vanguard Mystic player. Unfortunately, I think if he didn't have a 3-star Cassiopeia, we might have had a better shot versus this guy. But unfortunately, he has got the 3-star Cassiopeia. He's also got a 2-star Urgot on the bench. I just think, unfortunately, we're just unlikely to actually beat this chap with the amount of 3-star upgrades he's got. But we dragged ourselves from a pretty bad scenario, plus being contested, into a top 2 spot with Mech Sorcerer, which is really strong, as you can see from this particular game. So go ahead and enjoy.